Good morning, all my little blessings. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. That's Granddaddy's. So I am reading from our awesome book of Bible Answers by Josh McDowell. Um, and this question, is what kind of friend is God? And the answer is God is a better friend than you can ever imagine. He isn't just kind, His name is love, according to 1 John 4 7 and 8. 1 John 4 7 and 8, that's a song. He isn't just smart, He can count the hairs on your head. Matthew 10:30 says that. And He doesn't just own a big house, He rules the entire universe. Hello. Psalm 103, verse 19. To help you understand how great a friend God is, think of all the people that you trust most, like your parents, who give you a home and food and clothes and love, or your friends who make you laugh, or the police who protect you, or your favorite aunt who never forgets your birthday. And it doesn't even mention your grandparents who give you an hour of their time, or we give you reading this chapter and time because we love you so much, um, and want to spend time with you. God is like all those special people rolled up into one, except He's far, far better. He is perfect. Now, if you ask Granddaddy, he thinks he's perfect, but he's not. God is perfect. No one else is as loving, powerful, kind, and smart. He is God. And Psalm 86 verses 5 and verses 10 say, Lord, you are so good, so ready to forgive, so full of unfailing love for all who ask your aid, your help. For you are great and perform great miracles, and you alone are God. Now, I'm going to read chapter 11. And remember the little silvery ball that the great great grandmother gave to Irene. This one is called Irene's thread. What's going to happen with that ball of tiny silvery thread? So that same morning early, the morning of let's see, what had been happening? Curdy was stuck in a hole in the rock. That's right. Okay, so that same morning early, the princess woke in a terrible fright. There was a hideous noise in her room of creatures snarling and hissing and racketing about as if they were fighting. The moment she came to herself, she remembered what her grandmother told her to do when she was frightened. She immediately took off her ring and put it under her pillow. And as she did so, she fancied she felt a finger and a thumb take it gently from under her palm. That must be my grandmother, she said to herself, and the thought gave her so much courage that she stopped to put on her dainty little slippers before the phone is binging. She stopped to put on her dainty little slippers before running from the room. While doing this, she caught sight of a long cloak of sky blue thrown over the back of a chair by the bedside. She had never seen this before, but it was evidently waiting for her there. She put it on, and then, feeling with the forefinger of her right hand, she soon found her grandmother's thread, which she proceeded to follow at once, expecting that it would lead her straight up to the old stairs. When she reached the door, she found that it went down instead and ran along the floor, so that she had to almost crawl in order to keep a hold of it. Then, to her surprise and somewhat to her dismay, she found that instead of leading her towards the stair, it turned in quite the opposite direction. It led her through certain narrow passages towards the kitchen, turning aside ere she reached it, and guiding her to a door that communicated or connected to a small backyard. Across the yard, the thread still ran along the ground until it brought her to a door in the wall, which opened up on the mountainside. When she passed through the doorway, the thread rose to about half her height, and she could hold it with ease as she walked. It led her straight up the mountain. It was a clear, warm morning, and the wind was blowing deliciously over the mountainside. Here and there, Irene saw a late primrose, a flower, but she did not stop to call upon any of them. The sky was mottled up with small clouds, and the sun was not yet fully up, but some of their fluffy edges had caught the sun's light and hung out orange and gold-colored fringes upon the air. Oh, how lovely that bit of gossamer is, thought the princess, looking at a long, undulating line that shone at some distance from her up the hill. It wasn't the time for gossamers, though, and Irene soon discovered that it was her own thread that she saw shining on before her in the light of the morning. She didn't know where it was leading her, but she had never in her life been out before sunrise before, and everything was so fresh and cool and lively that she felt very happy and too happy to be afraid of anything. After a good distance, the thread turned to the left and down the path upon which she and Ludi had met Curdie. But she didn't think about that, for now in the morning light, with its far outlook over the country, no path could have been more open and airy and cheerful. Down and down the path went, then up, then down, then up, getting more rugged as it went. And still along the path went the silvery thread, and still along the thread went Irene's little forefinger. By and by she came to a little stream that jabbered and prattled down the hill. Up the side of the stream went both path and thread. The path grew rougher and steeper still, and the mountain grew even wilder, till Irene began to think that she was going a very long way from home indeed. When she turned to look back, she saw that the level country had gone, and the rough, bare mountain had closed in all about her. But still on went the thread, and so on went the princess. Everything around her was getting brighter and brighter as the sun came nearer, till at length his first rays all at once lighted on top of a rock before her, like some golden creature fresh from the sky. Then she saw that the little stream ran out of a hole in that rock. The path did not go past the rock, and the thread was leading her straight up to it. A shudder ran through her from head to foot when she found that the thread was actually taking her into a hole. The stream ran out of the mountain, babbling joyously, but she had to go in the mountain. She didn't hesitate. Right into that hole she went, which was high enough to let her walk about without stooping. For a little way there was a brown glimmer, but at the first turn it all but went out, and before she had gone very many more steps she was in total darkness. Then she began to be frightened indeed. Every moment she kept feeling the thread backwards and forwards. As she went farther and farther into the darkness of the great hollow mountain, she kept thinking more and more about her grandmother, and all that her grandmother had said to her, and how kind she had been to her, how beautiful she was, and all about her lovely room and the fire of roses and the great lamp that sent its light through stone walls. She became more and more sure that the thread could not have gone there itself. Her grandmother must have sent the thread there. But it tried her dreadfully when the path went down very steep, and especially when she came to places where she had to go down rough stairs and sometimes even a ladder. Through one narrow passage after another, over lumps of rock and sand and clay, the thread guided her until she came to a small hole through which she had to creep. Wonder if it's taken her to Curdie. We'll find out. Stuck in the rock. Sometimes she heard the noise of water, a dull gurgling inside the rock. By and by she heard the sounds of blows, hammer blows, which came nearer and nearer, but again they grew duller, and then they almost died away. In 100 directions she turned, obedient to the guiding thread in her hand. At last she spied a dull red shine, and she came right into a cavern where glowed some red embers from a fire. Here the thread began to rise up again. It rose as high as her head and higher still. What should she do if she lost her hold? She was pulling it down, and she might break it. She could see it far up, glowing as red as her fire opal in the light of the embers. But presently she came to a huge heap of stones piled in a slope against the wall of the cavern. On these she climbed up and soon recovered the level of the thread, only to find the next moment that it vanished right through the heap of stones and left her standing on it with her face to the solid rock. For one terrible moment she felt as if her grandmother had forsaken her. The thread had gone where nobody could follow it, had brought her into a horrible cavern and left her there. She threw herself on the heap and began to cry. It was well that she didn't know that creatures, one of them with stone shoes on her feet, were lying in the very next cave. At length the thought struck her that she could at least follow the thread backwards and thus get out of the mountain and home. She got up at once and found the thread, but the instant she tried to feel it backwards, it vanished from her touch. Forwards, it led her hand up to the heap of stones. Backwards, it went nowhere. Neither could she see it as she had before in the light of the fire. She burst into a wailing cry and again threw herself down on the stones. Ah! What am I to do? As the princess lay and sobbed, she kept feeling the thread mechanically, following it with her finger many times up to the stones in which it disappeared. By and by she began, still mechanically, to poke her finger in between the stones as far as she could. All at once it came into her head that she might remove some of those stones and see where the thread went next. Almost laughing at herself for never having thought of this before, she jumped to her feet. Her fear went away, and once more she was certain her grandmother's thread could not have brought her there just to leave her. So she began to throw away the stones from the top as fast as she could, sometimes 2 or 3 at a handful, sometimes taking both hands to lift one. After clearing them away a little, she found that the thread turned and went straight downwards. She began to be afraid that to clear the thread she must remove the whole huge gathering of stones. She was dismayed at the very idea, but losing no time, she went to work with a will. With aching back and bleeding fingers and hands, she worked on and on, sustained by the pleasure of seeing the heap of rocks slowly diminish, get smaller. As often as she uncovered a turn of the thread, it tightened up again instead of lying loose upon the stones. This made her sure that her grandmother was at the other end of it somewhere. She had got about halfway down when she nearly fell with fright. Close to her ears, a voice broke out singing, "Jabber, bother, smash, you'll have it all in a crash. Jabber, smash, bother, you'll have the worst of the pother. Smash, bother, jabber." Here Curdie stopped, either because he couldn't find a rhyme to jabber, or because he remembered that his plan was to make the goblins think he was getting weaker and weaker. But he had uttered enough to let Irene know exactly who he was. "It's Curdie!" she cried joyfully. "Hush, hush," came Curdie's voice from somewhere. "Speak softly." "Why, you were singing loud." "Yes, but they know I'm here, and they don't know you are. Who are you?" "I'm Irene," said the princess. "I know who you are quite well. You're Curdie." "Well, however did you come here, Irene?" And here's the picture. Curdie stuck in the rock and Irene clearing away the stones to get to Curdie and set him free. "My great-great-grandmother sent me, and I think I found out why. You can't get out, I suppose." "No, I can't." "What are you doing?" "I'm clearing away a huge heap of stones." "There's a princess!" exclaimed Curdie in a tone of delight, but still speaking in little more than a whisper. "I can't think how you got here, though." "My grandmother sent me after her thread." "I don't know what you mean," said Curdie, "but you can tell me all about it when we get out of here. There's no time to lose now." So Irene went to work as fresh as when she began. "There's such a lot of stones, it will take me a long time to get them all away." "How far on have you gotten?" "I've gotten about the half of them away, but the other half is ever so much bigger." "Well, I don't think you'll have to move the lower half. Do you see a slab laid up against the wall?" Irene looked and felt about with her hand and soon perceived the outlines of the slab. "Yes," she said, "I do." "Then when you have cleared the slab about halfway down, or maybe a little more, I can push it over." But I have to follow my thread, returned Irene, whatever I do. What do you mean? Said Curdie. You'll see when you get out, said the princess, and she went on harder than ever, moving rocks. But she was soon satisfied that what Curdie wanted done and what the thread wanted done were one and the same thing. As soon as she realized this, she said in a right joyous whisper, Now, Curdie, I think if you were to give a great push, the slab would tumble over. We'll stand quite clear of it then, said Curdie, and let me know when you're ready. Irene jumped off the heap and stood off on one side of it. Now, Curdie, she cried. Curdie gave a great rush with his shoulder against it. Out tumbled the slab on the heap, and out crept Curdie over the top of it. Irene, you've saved my life, he whispered. Oh, Curdie, I'm so glad. Let's get out of this terrible place as fast as we can. Well, that's a little easier said than done. Oh, no, said the princess. It's quite easy. We have only to follow my thread. I am sure that it's going to take us out now. She had already begun to follow it over the fallen slab into the hole while Curdie was searching the floor of the cavern for his pickaxe. Here it is, he cried. No, it's not, he added in a disappointed tone. What can it be then? I declare it's a torch. Well, that is jolly. It's better almost than my pickaxe. Excuse me, much better if it weren't for those stone shoes. He went on as he lighted the torch by blowing on the last embers of the expiring fire. When he looked up with the lighted torch casting a glare into the great darkness of the huge cavern, he caught sight of Irene disappearing into the hole out of which he had himself just come. Where are you going? He cried. That's not the way out. That's where I couldn't get out. I know that, whispered Irene, but this is the way my thread goes, and so I must follow it. What nonsense the child talks, said Curdie to himself. I must follow her, though, and see that she comes to no harm. She will soon find that she can't get out that way, and then she will come with me. So he crept over the slab once more into the hole with the torch in his hand, but when he looked about in it, he could see her nowhere, and now he had discovered that although the hole was narrow, it was much longer than he had supposed. For in one direction the roof came down very low, and the hole went off in a narrow passage of which he could not see the end. The princess must have crept in there. He got on his knees and one hand, holding the torch with the other, and crept after her. The hole twisted about, and in some parts it was so low that he could hardly get through. In others it was so high that he could not see the roof. But everywhere it was narrow, far too narrow for a goblin to get through, and so I presume they never thought that Curdie might. He was beginning to feel very uncomfortable lest something should have befallen the princess when he heard her voice almost close to his ear, whispering, Aren't you coming, Curdie? When he turned the next corner, she stood waiting for him. I knew you couldn't go wrong in that narrow hole, but now you must keep right close to me, for here is a great wide place. I can't understand it, said Curdie, half to himself, half to Irene. Never mind, she returned. Wait till we get out. Curdie, utterly astonished that she had already gotten so far, and by a path he had not known about, thought it better to let her do as she pleased. Thought better of it. He followed her a few steps and came out in another great cavern, across which Irene walked in a straight line as confidently as she knew every step of the way. Curdie went on after her, flashing his torch about and trying to see something of what lay around them. Suddenly he started back a pace as the light fell upon something close by which Irene was passing. It was a platform of rock raised a few feet from the floor and covered with sheepskins, upon which lay two horrible figures asleep, at once recognized by Curdie as the king and queen of the goblins. He lowered his torch instantly, lest the light should awaken them. As he did so, it flashed upon his pickaxe, lying by the side of the queen. Stop one moment, he whispered. Hold my torch and don't let the light on their faces. Irene shuddered when she saw the frightful creatures, but she did as he requested and, turning her back, held the torch low in front of her. Curdie drew his pickaxe carefully away, and as he did so, spied one of the queen's feet, projecting from under the skins. The great clumsy granite shoe exposed thus to his hand was a temptation not to be resisted. He laid hold of the shoe and with cautious efforts drew it off. Here's Gertie pulling her shoe off. Looks like their eyes are open. Can you see him taking her granite shoe off? The moment he succeeded, he saw to his astonishment that what he had sung in ignorance to annoy the queen was actually true. She had 6 horrible-looking toes. Overjoyed at his success and seeing by the huge bump in the sheepskins where the other foot was, he proceeded to lift them gently, for if he could only succeed in carrying away the other shoe as well, he would be no more afraid of the goblins than of so many flies. But as he pulled on the second shoe, the queen gave a growl and sat up in bed. The same instant, the king awoke also and sat up beside her. "Run, Irene," said Gertie, for though he was not now in the least afraid for himself, he was afraid for the princess. Irene looked around, saw the fearful creatures awake, and like the wise princess that she was, dashed the torch on the ground and extinguished it, crying out, "Here, Gertie, take my hand." He darted to her side, forgetting neither the queen's shoe nor his pickaxe, and caught hold of her hand as she sped fearlessly where her thread guided her. They heard the queen give a great bellow, but they had a good start before, for it would be some time before they could get torches lighted to pursue them. Just as they thought they saw a gleam behind them, the thread brought them to a very narrow opening, through which Irene crept easily, and Gertie with some difficulty. "Now," said Gertie, "I think we shall be safe." "Of course," returned Irene. "My grandmother is taking care of us." This is a long chapter. "Well, that's all nonsense. I don't know what you mean." "Then if you don't know what I mean, what right have you to call it nonsense?" asked the princess, a little offended. "I beg your pardon, Irene. I did not mean to vex you." "Well, of course not," returned the princess. "But why do you think we shall be safe?" "Because the king and queen are far too stout to get through that hole. There might be ways around the hole. To be sure there might. We're not out of it yet," acknowledged Gertie. "But what do you mean by king and queen?" asked the princess. "I should never call such creatures as those a king and a queen." "But their own people do," Gertie said. The princess asked more questions, and Gertie, as they walked leisurely along, gave her a full account not only of the character and the habits of the goblins, so far as he knew them, but of his own adventures with them, beginning with the very night after he had met her and Ludi upon the mountain. When he had finished, he begged Irene to tell him how it was that she had come to his rescue. So Irene, too, had to tell a long story, which she did in rather a roundabout manner, interrupted by many questions concerning things she had not explained. But as Gertie did not believe more than half of her tale anyway, it left everything as unaccountable to him as before. "But however did Ludi come to let you go into the mountains alone?" "Ludi doesn't know anything about it. I left her fast asleep. At least I hope so. I hope my grandmother won't let her get into trouble, for it wasn't her fault at all." "But how did you find your way to me?" "I told you already," said Irene, "by keeping my finger upon my grandmother's thread, as I am doing now." "You don't mean you've got the thread there?" "Well, of course I do. I've told you so 10 times already. I've hardly, except when I was removing the stones, taken my finger off of it. There," she added, guiding Gertie's hand to the thread. "You feel it yourself, don't you?" "I don't feel anything at all," said Gertie. "Then what can be the matter with your finger? I feel it perfectly. To be sure, it's very, very thin, and in the sunlight looks just like a thread of a spider, but I can't think why you shouldn't feel it as well as I do." Gertie was too polite to say he did not believe there was any thread there at all. What he did say was, "Well, I can make nothing of it." "I can, though," said the princess, "and you must be glad of that, because it will do for both of us," returned Irene confidently. And now the thread went downwards and led Irene's hand to a hole in the floor of the cavern, whence came a sound of running water, which they had been hearing for some time. "It goes into the ground now, Gertie," she said, stopping. He had been listening to another sound which his practiced ear had caught long ago, and had been growing louder. It was the noise the goblin miners made at their work, and they seemed to be at no great distance away now. Irene heard it the moment she stopped. "What's that noise?" she asked. "It's the goblins digging and burrowing. And you don't know what they do it for?" "No, I haven't the least idea. Would you like to see them?" he asked, wishing to have another try after their secret. "If my thread took me there, I shouldn't much mind, but my thread leads me down into the hole, and we had better go at once." "Very well. Shall I go in first?" "No, you can't feel the thread," she said, stepping down through a narrow break in the floor of the cavern. "Oh," she cried, "I'm in the water. It's running strong, but it's not deep, and there's just room to walk. Come on, hurry up, Curdy." He tried, but the hole was too small for him to get in. "Go on forward a little bit," he said, shouldering his pickaxe. In a few more moments he had cleared a larger opening and followed after her. They went on, down, 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 with the running water. Curdy, getting more and more afraid it was leading them to some terrible gulf in the heart of the mountain. In one or two places he had to break away the rock to make a room before even Irene could get through, at least without hurting herself. But at length they spied a glimmer of light, and in a minute more they were almost blinded by the full sunlight into which they emerged. It was some little time before the princess could see well enough to discover that they stood in her own garden, close by the seat on which she and her king papa had sat that other afternoon. They had come out by the channel of the little stream. She danced and clapped her hands with delight. "Now, Curdy," she cried, "won't you believe what I told you about my grandmother and her thread?" For she had felt all the time that Curdy was not believing what she told him. "There, don't you see it shining on before us?" she added. "I don't see anything," said Curdy. "Then you must believe without seeing," said the princess, "for you can't deny that it brought us out of the mountain." "Well, I certainly can't deny that we're out of the mountain, and I should be ungrateful indeed to deny that you had brought me out of it. I couldn't have done it at all but for the thread," said Irene. "That's the part I don't understand." "Well, come along, and Ludi will give you something to eat. I'm sure you must want it very much. Indeed I do, but my father and mother will be so anxious about me. I must make haste. First up the mountain to tell my mother, and then down into the mine again to let my father know." "Very well, Curdy, but you can't get out without coming this way, and I will take you through the house, for that is nearest." They met no one by the way, for indeed, as before, the people were here and there and everywhere searching for the princess. When she got inside, Irene found that the thread, as she half expected, went up the old staircase, and a new thought struck her. She turned to Curdy and said, "My grandmother wants me. Do come up with me and see her. Then you will know that I have been telling you the truth. Do come, to please me, Curdy. I can't bear you should think what I say is not true." "I never doubted that you believed what you said," said Curdy. "I only thought you had some fancy in your head that wasn't right. Oh, please do come, dear Curdy." The little miner could not withstand this appeal, and though he felt shy in what seemed to him a huge grand house, he yielded and followed her up the stair. The end of chapter 11.